Yes, yes. I forget what I was doing. I don't
Oh, that's
remember.
okay. You're forgiven.
Okay, let me open this up here from the beginning. Oop. All right, so yeah, we're going to be starting the seven seals of God. Again, there's a good chance that we'll be, just on the first one today, because again, we've just been talking in the last few minutes of how there is different interpretations and ideas and what things can mean. And so, we'll take our time with it. We're not in a rush. But let's begin then. So we are in Revelation chapter 6. And we will be reading from verse 1. Let me just get everyone's face here on the screen. All right. It's very short. It's only 2 verses long. And the first verse really is just an introduction to the seal. So really it's going to come down to one single verse, but I'm sure we'll have enough to talk about to fill up our hour here. Can someone read verses 1 and 2 for us? Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 and 2.
Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a loud voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he went out conquering and to conquer.
All right. So the first verse really is an introduction. We're going to see this especially for the first 4 with the 4 horsemen. The 4 living creature, one of them just simply comes up and says, okay, see what's in the seal. See what Jesus has opened. So the first verse really is just an introduction. But verse 2 is where all the action is. So he looked and beheld, and the first thing he sees is a white horse. All right. The first 4 seals are going to be horses or riders of horses. The first one we see here is a white horse, which usually, almost always in the Bible, the color white is seen as, purity, as the idea of holiness, God's people, white, right? Wear the white robes. So that's usually what this symbolizes. What you're going to see is that within the 4 horses, each color of the horse is directly connected to the message of that seal, right? So the first one is a white horse. Does anyone want to start there before we talk about the rest of that verse? Any ideas of why it's a white horse, what that can possibly symbolize?
Conquest.
Conquest? It's an interesting way of saying it. Usually when we think of conquest, we think of battle, right? Usually when we think of battles, we think of blood. It's red. It's, violent. This isn't like that. We're not seeing a bloody, if you simply compare this with the next horse, for instance, the next horse will be the red horse, which is literally about, battle and war and blood and things like that. This one seems very different, right? This one seems a lot cleaner, if nothing else.
I'm thinking of peace.
Peace, okay.
Yeah.
I would push it more towards that as well. There's nothing. The only thing that can be considered violent here, I guess, is the bow, which we're actually going to spend quite a few slides on. And I guess the idea of conquering and to conquer. But it's definitely not violent. We're not seeing any violent imagery here or wording.
That's why I said conquest, because it's all finished. It's conquest. He had the bow and he has a crown.
The crown is not power.
Yeah, so he's conquered. Yeah.
All right, so we can't help it, right? We got to get into the next section. So he has several things here. The first thing that it mentions is that he has a bow. The second thing is that a crown was given to him, right? So he also receives a crown. And then it talks about what he's doing, which is conquering and to conquer, right? So the three main things, the first one, or four, let's make four. It's a white horse, he has a bow, he's given a crown, and he's conquering, all right?
Is he a king?
I will say this, it's not an individual person, because when you look through the four horsemen, they're not individual peoples. It's not someone. It's more of a movement, really. So it's an event or a movement that is happening. Because as you get to the second, third, and fourth one, they're not individual. So it doesn't represent a historical figure. At least when you compare it with the other four, right? The other four or the other three aren't individuals. They're, again, movements or events that are taking place, right?
I was thinking Jesus.
Yeah, so that does come up a lot. We know there is another place in Revelation that talks about Jesus on this white horse and coming down and so on. There are some commentators, as Ken mentioned, that kind of make that connection. I don't see that here. Ken actually mentioned a couple of points. One is Jesus has already conquered, right? Like Jesus has already had his victory. So the idea that he personally is going out to conquer, he's already won the war. You know. The idea that a crown is given to him, again, I would say that Jesus already has the crown at this point, right? He receives the crown, if anything, in chapter 5 when he's worshipped and considered worthy and so on. So again, I wouldn't necessarily put this as Jesus himself. The way I usually see it, so I'll give you my kind of limited interpretation. I usually see this as like the early church. So it's not Christ himself, but it is God's movement here on earth that is going out to continue the work that Jesus has started. You'll remember in Acts, right, when Jesus says, when he talks to his apostles, right, start in Jerusalem and then the surrounding areas and then the world. That's usually how I see it. But anyone else have any ideas of what these four symbols can mean? Again, the white horse, the bow, the giving of a crown, and conquering. Can anyone make a connection there or an explanation?
Yeah,
The white horse.
Go ahead.
The white horse would be symbol of purity, and it also it also proclaims Christianity.
Okay. Yeah, usually the
The
color
rider
white,
on the white
right?
horse, yeah.
Yeah, so for instance, you can compare the two women of Revelation. The godly woman is dressed in white, while the prostitute woman is dressed in that red, right? So yeah, usually white is very much connected to purity, to truth, to light, to the church, and so on. Yeah. Ken, you were going to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, the crown is not a crown of a monarch, but a crown of one who is conquered.
Yes.
You know, it's like
On the ward.
on the Romans emperors go out in war and they conquer.
Yeah.
They'll come back with this whatever on their head as a crown, and usually it says the emperor would ride a white horse. And maybe in the time of when John was writing, Domitian, who was the emperor at the time, he went out to battle, and usually he come back, and maybe this is the picture, as Tungstad said, they might have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But what is interesting is why the seals. Many of the commentaries would use the seals as the covenant curse. And so is the 7 churches the blessing and the seals the curse? And if the seals are the curse, why would you have the curse, these seals, when, for example, you've got the 5th seal, it says, they're the saints under the altar crying out, how long will you not avenge us for what we're doing? You know, we've given our lives, we've taken our lives, and you have not avenged us because of all that went on. So if these were covenant curses, then why are the angels saying, why have you not avenged us for what they've done to us?
Yeah.
And so one commentary is saying that God is just in these, he doesn't believe that these are the covenant curses.
Yeah.
Because the very first one doesn't seem to be a curse based
It's too
on
pure,
the
right?
commentaries that went before.
Yeah.
Because he's going out with the gospel and so on.
Mm-hmm.
While Tungstad, who has written this commentary, says that he believed, and he's quoting many of the scholars who've researched this, and they're saying they believe this horse is stolen, the white horse is stolen. And the white horse is really going out with his deception. Because if we remember, the first church has lost its love or left its love. And after the apostles died around 67 to 68 AD, Peter and Paul were beheaded then. The gospel didn't have that impetus. And so slowly, apparently creep into the church, is compromised with the surrounding environment. And so we've got in all the churches, the 7 churches we looked at before, all this compromise, deception. Many of the people who believe that they're Jews, but they're not. They believe that they're, they hold to the doctrine of Nicolaitans and so on and so forth. So the church is having a lot of problems, it would appear. So that this first seal, it doesn't look as though Jesus is conquering, because the church, the first church or the first Christian community, does not give you that impression that Jesus is conquering, when the church of itself, the very first church, has left its first love. So there seem to be some problem to this idea. But as I said, many of the early commentaries, like Marvin Maxwell, even Stefanovic, and Stefanovic was a student of John Pauline, and Pauline earlier on had the same idea, but there's some divergence, because he brings up this idea of why this horse, this one, differ from the other 3.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue, right?
Yeah.
Because as we see the other 3 churches, they're definitely not positive, right? You see the issues there, war, pestilence, death, things like that. This one seems so different, right? This one is this white horse who's given a crown. Most, if not all of it, seems positive, right? And so it's very contrasted compared to the other 3. I would agree. When I look at the 7 seals, I don't see the plagues, right? The condemnation of breaking whatever the covenant. I see that a lot more with the trumpets. The trumpets is definitely like the warnings of God, right? God warning the world with these trumpets. I'm coming soon, and these are to open your eyes. With this one, because again, remember that it's Jesus is the only one who's worthy to receive this scroll, right? So this scroll is connected to the earth somehow, right? Because Jesus is the one that died for the earth, died for those that accepted him, and so there's definitely a connection between the world or God's people and this scroll, right? And we're going to see that as you go through the 7 seals. For instance, like the 5th one that Ken mentioned, right? It directly, actually calls out God's people crying out from on the altar and so on. So I would definitely say that this scroll is connected to God's people. The same way the trumpets are very much focused on the world, those who haven't chosen Christ, I would say that the scroll is very much connected to those that have chosen Christ. Almost as, okay, you've chosen Christ and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? So this scroll is going to let you know. This scroll is going to let you know what your future is going to look like, right? If you stay on my side, right? If you stay as my child. We'll see that as we go through the 7. But yeah, I definitely say the first seal is the strangest out of all of them. As simple as it seems, it's the one that's most out of place.
Pastor.
Yep.
I'm looking at this white horse as you said in the beginning, is first church. It makes sense because they had a water fight, but it wasn't a bloody war.
Yeah.
Their war was fighting for the word to get out, right? They were persecuted.
Yeah.
So that was their fight with the bull. And then they were given a crown, which is, as Ken said, the reward that was given to the person who was conquered, right? It's not a king's wreath, but it's a winner of a race or whatever.
Yeah.
So they have fought the good
victor,
fight.
Right? The victor.
They have finished the race, right? So, and I can see that as being this first church for all these reasons.
Well, the one thing that really is out of place, and that's what I want to focus on in the next couple of verses. The white horse, like Ken mentioned, right, is usually the horse that's used after the victory, right? You march into the city wearing your crown, walking, going down on your white horse. You've had the victory. The big question is the bow, right? Why isn't it a sword or a spear or some other symbol, right? Why does God use the image of a bow? So what I've actually done is I've gone through the entire Bible. I've taken out all the times that it's used literally, and I'm going to show you every time that it's used symbolically. All right, when God uses the idea of a bow symbolically. Louise, go ahead. I know you have your hand up.
Isn't a bow a symbolic for a gift that God is giving to us?
Well, we'll find out. Well, we don't have to guess. The Bible is going to tell us. All right. So let's. Anyone else have another point before we get through the verses? You want to?
Yeah, I was thinking of the other seals. For example, you refer to the 5th, which was again a tragedy with the saints. They've been persecuted or executed. And then I look at the 6th seal, and that is cosmic turbulence, the Lisbon earthquake and so on and so forth. And when I come to the last of the seals, when it says we believe there was silence in heaven, we're not sure what it means. I know Ellen White talks about the saints are coming back, to reclaim those who have accepted Christ and Savior. We come to the ending of all things. And if that's the case, one would believe that heaven would be jubilant. This is the ending of redemption. We're now going to the saints and so on and so forth. On the other hand, it appears though this silence could be, and I'm not saying it, even though there's silence, it could be in itself a tragedy. Tragedy in the sense that, we've worked all these thousands of years for the saints, and the majority haven't accepted Christ. And we've come to the end, and they're mourning, they're sad that human beings have not accepted Christ and will not be saved. And so there's this silence. But all of the seals appear to be some tragedy, it's tragic. And it would say that the first one, there must be something about the first one that says it is not the gospel as we think is going forward. And to add to that, it says that the only warrior out there who wants to go out to battle and to continue to fight is the devil. Even though he is lost, he's not giving up. And as I said, the one commentary says that they believe this horse, the white, is stolen. And what is going forward here is the evil one, and he's providing deception in the world, compromise and deception. Because remember, there are 2 things that he is particularly good with. One is to slander, and the second one is to deceive. that is what he normally does.
Yeah, we do know that, anything that God does, the devil will always create a duplicate, right? A false version of it. It's interesting because, the Bible has, three sets of sevens. It's the seven churches, the seven seals, and the seven trumpets. I always keep the plagues separate because I see that as something different. But it's interesting how the seven churches are fairly clear, right? Like there's a little bit of deviation in terms of a couple of dates, but in general, you can see it fairly clearly, what's going on. The same is true with the trumpets. The trumpets, there is some, question about specific ones, the fifth, the sixth. But in general, you can also see, a very clear transition. The seals, however, is where, like you've mentioned, Ken, you can almost go in two completely different directions, right? And they both kind of work and they both kind of have their issues, right? But that's why we're studying it, right? That's why we're reading through it. Let's take the different options and then put it all together and then hopefully at least understand it a little better. Even if we can't say this is what it means, but at least we can get a more rounded view of the options, right? So that's what we're going to do. I want to focus on the bow, though, for a little while here. So I picked out the main verses that use the bow in a symbolic or spiritual nature. So the first one here is Genesis 49:24. Does someone want to read this one?
But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel.
All right, so it's a little taken out of context, but here you can see that the bow is connected to strength, right? The bow is connected to the same way, where it says, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God. So it's almost like a hand holding a hand, the same way a hand holds a bow, right? What we're going to see is when the bow is intact, it's a symbol of strength. When the bow is broken or the string is weak or loose, then it's a sign of like losing strength or even of death, all right? So this is the first one. So it's connected with the strength of Jacob, basically, right? The strength of the person is mirrored in the bow, the fact that the bow is tight and strong. Then we have Job 29:20. Does someone want to read this one here?
My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is renewed in my hand.
All right. So again, here it's still an idea of strength, but more of this refreshing, right? This kind of life. The life that he's talking about is again paralleled with the idea of the bow. The bow is tight and strong in my hand. So in both cases, we have strength, and then we have this refreshing life inside of him. Job 30, so that was 29. Then we jump to Job 30, verse 11. And here we get the opposite now, right? So in verse 29, the bow is new, it's strong, and it gives him life, right? Gives him this refreshing. In 30, we get the opposite. So let me read this one here. Because he has loosed the bowstring and afflicted me, they have cast off restraint before me. So the idea that the string of the bow has become loose, and it's a symbolic thing of kind of Job's suffering, right? I've also been loosed. I have no more strength in me, right? So as long as the bow is intact, it's strength. When the bow is loosed or broken, it's affliction, right? It's this loss of power and of life. Let's go to Ecclesiastes. This is probably the most symbolic out of all of them. Ecclesiastes 12:6-7. Someone want to read this one? This one's directly connected to life, by the way. Someone want to read this one?
I remember your creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it.
Yeah. So we're not sure if the silver cord is connected to it, but again, the idea is as things break, it's a loss of life, right? This one's interesting. This one I would say very much connects probably with the idea of revelation, why he carries a bow with him. So this is Psalm 64. Does someone want to read this one, verses 3 and 4?
Who sharpen their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, bitter words, that they might shoot in secret at the blameless. Suddenly they shoot at him and do not fear.
All right. The first part of that we're used to, right? The idea that the sword represents the tongue. We've seen that several times in Revelation, actually. But the second part is interesting. He says that they bend their bow to shoot their arrows, and those arrows are those bitter words, right? So the bow here is connected to your words, the way you speak. All right. Very similar to the way the sword is. Which makes sense with Revelation, right? Because it doesn't, the conquesting that seems to be that seems to be going on here isn't a physical one, right? Now you can debate whether, again, like Ken was saying, whether it's kind of this false white horse, stolen white horse, preaching falsehood, or whether it's the real white horse, right? Godly white horse that's preaching God's word. In either way, this bow would represent the words, right? Whether the words are good or bad is dependent on how we see it, right? But here the bow could represent the message of the man, right? He shoots out through his bow these words. In Psalms, they're bitter words, right? Psalm 64. But when we go to Jeremiah, it's also negative for some reason. Does someone want to read Jeremiah 9, verse 3?
Unlike their bow, they have bent their tongues for lies. They are not valiant for the truth on the earth, for they proceed from evil to evil, and they do not know me, says the Lord.
All right. So those are the main ones, I believe. Yeah. So let me go back to Revelation here now. When you read through the Bible now, so we're going to try to connect these ideas. There's two ways that bows are represented symbolically. They either represent the life of the person, so a strong bow means strength, a weak bow means weakness or affliction, or, and I would push more towards this, the bow represents the words of the person, right? The words that the person launches out, like the same way you launch arrows. What's interesting, and this would actually push towards that false horse idea, is that the two times that the bow is used as words, it's negative, right? It's connected with lying, and it's connected with bitter words. If you wanted to add a third one in, it's a little bit different, but I think you'll see the similarities. You remember Ephesians chapter 6, right, with the armor of God? Now, the armor of God doesn't have a bow, right? It has a sword. The sword is the word of God. The devil, however, is said to be throwing the fiery darts, right? Which is a lot more connected to the idea of a bow, right? He's launching the arrows or the darts, which again, for the third time, would really push towards a negative thing, right? So in one case, in Psalms, it's used as bitter words, right? The arrows of the bow. In Jeremiah, it's connected to lies, right? They pull back their bow and launch their lies. And then if you do include Ephesians, it's the fiery darts of the devil, which obviously have to be negative, right? Have to be lies as well. So it works, right? This idea that it's this false purity, right? When you read through the seven churches, you do see a lot of that, right? This idea that, they think they're pure, they think they're rich, they think they're the children of God, but are actually children of the devil, things like that. So it does work. Which one it is, that's a good question, right? That's a good question. When you read it by itself, and this is why I'm saying I don't believe we're going to have an answer today. To understand the first horse, I think we have to read all seven seals, right? You have to pick up the commonality between all seven to then maybe understand the first one, right? Think of it this way. If you just have one post in the ground, you can't tell which direction the fence is going to go, right? You need several posts to then understand, okay, this is the direction of the fence. And I think that's what we're seeing here with this first horse. Traditionally, I'll say this, I can't say it, but I'll just repeat it. Traditionally speaking, right? So the early interpretation is that this represents the first church, right? That pure church. But again, let's remember, yes, it's a good church, but it's a loveless church, right? And in fact, God says, if you don't get the love back, I'm going to blow out your candles, right? Or in other words, I'm going to cut you out, right? You have no place with me. So yes, it's a good church, but it's not a perfect church, right? You can't say it's a pure church in that respect. So it really does work in both directions, I think. So the traditional one is that it represents the first church, the early church. But there is some newer ideas that says that it's possibly the idea of like this false, right? This almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of an image, right? Where it looks nice, but let's remember it's part of the four horsemen, right? The four horsemen are always seemed as negative. And so it would be strange that one would be positive and then the other three would be negative. So that's why there is this push towards maybe this horse doesn't seem to be what it looks like, right? Maybe there is some sense of deception or something going on here. And the bow does work with that, right? When you take the Bible texts, the bow does connect with bitter words, lies, and possibly even the fiery darts. Any ideas on this?
So Tongstad does use this imagery, and he compares it with the imagery later on in Revelation that shows Christ on the horse, this white horse, but he doesn't have a bow. Instead, he has this two-edged sword. And this two-edged sword we find in Revelation, I think 1 and Revelation 2, he has this. So it pictures Christ as one who is revealing, and he knows the consciences, what is in our thoughts, and he knows everything about us. Because as we look at the churches, he knows everything about these Christian communities. But one of the questions is, why these seals? Are they the covenant curses, as many of the early commentaries have or commentators have? Are these the curses because of disobedience? It is interesting that one commentary, one that has come out just recently, said that the seals is God's way of saying to us, let me warn you about what is to come.
Yeah.
See, so in the early writers, and the earliest I could think of is Morvan Maxwell and God Cares Too. And he used to make his point by using, let's say, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 in the Olivet Discourse. And he compares that with the seals. And there's a good comparison, except the deception that runs right throughout all of them is not in the comparison. And when you go back and you look at, for example, it says, in all of discourse, the first thing Jesus says in Matthew 24:4, and Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ. And that particular deception runs through all of the gospel writers. So the question is, why for us? What does these seals mean for us today? What are they trying to tell us?
Yeah.
How important is that to me or you?
I think the important thing too is we have to remember that seals themselves are vital in the book of Revelation, right? Everything in this book is going to come down to two seals, or a seal and a mark, right? You either have the seal of God or the mark of the beast, which in itself is a seal, right? The mark is a seal. So the whole book, the whole book runs with these two seals, these two marks. And again, I can't help but go back and remind the fact that this is a scroll that Jesus is worthy to hold. So I would point that these seals are actually positive, even though they do carry negative things with them, right? But again, is a warning negative? Well, no. A warning is positive, right? A warning is a way of saying you can protect yourself from what's coming. The one thing we have to remember is, think about the Christian life. Is becoming a Christian positive? Yes. But does that mean you're not going to suffer? Absolutely not, right? You are going to suffer. I think Paul is a perfect example here. Paul suffered much more as a Christian than he did as a Jew, right? And so just because there's negative things under these seals, I don't see that as, you being cursed by God in any way. When I look at these seven seals, I see them as, listen, you've chosen me, your name is like in this seal kind of a thing. And these seals shows that even though you'll pass through negative things, I'm with you. Even though you'll pass through these things, these events, realize that I've already sealed you, right? You're already part of me, and so it's not a negative in that way. So it's I would really I really wouldn't say that they're the curses, because like you even said earlier, Ken, God's already won the victory, right? These the people that are reading this, these are God's people who have the victory, who have that thing already. So I see it as, again, using another example, as the 10 plagues of Egypt, where God is saying, listen, these things will happen, but I'm going to be with you. I'm going to protect you, right? And so that's how I see these seals. And I think we'll see that as we go through all seven of them. Yes, there's negative things there, but there's still that underlying promise that, this is still in the hands of God. Jesus is the one with this scroll. He's the one opening the seals, which means that he's the one in control. So it doesn't matter how bad the situation gets, we can have that assurity because we ourselves are sealed, right? Again, it's hard to do this because we've only read the first one, but as we go through the seven, I think we'll start picking up more and more. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I tend to agree, because the way I see the seals is that God knows the future. And he's trying to acquaint us with what is coming so we can be prepared. Exactly. Not caught off guard. Because as the Bible says, Jesus says, I will tell you these things before they actually happen. And so when they happen, you will know that I am the God who is the first and the last, and I only can tell you what the future holds. So when they come about, they come about, they will convince you that I know, and I warn you because I love you and I want you to take care.
Yeah.
These things are coming.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it's interesting when we come to the second seal, we'll come out some other time. Townsend paints a curious picture. He says, the creatures are now saying to come and see. but it's as though he's calling the events to come about, to take place, that he's aware of these events and he's calling it, which is not in this one here.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I corroborate with you that it is, these seals are positive for us because God is saying these things will occur.
Yeah.
I want you to be warned so that you can confront them when they come.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, we just have to go right back to the beginning. Let's always remember what the purpose of this book is. This is the book that reveals the future of God's people, right? This is the future of humanity and the work that Jesus is doing throughout that history, right? So again, even at the darkest moments, and we saw this even with the seven churches, right? Even with the darkest church, you see hope. You see love of God. You see compassion and God still not giving up, right? Even though this church is dead, he's still working with the few embers that are left and so on. So I would definitely say that overall, this is still a very positive book. This is God, again, trying to, yes, warn us, but also to comfort us and say, listen, yes, these things will happen, but don't be afraid, right? Don't be afraid because there's another seal and things change. And then at the end, we have salvation, right? Which is really that's our Christian goal, right? Yes, we're going to go through hard times, but if we trust in God, we prevail. We have victory. And so I would say very much that these seven seals are kind of parallel with that. I will put this kind of goes with the traditional view, just because it's there, so I thought I'd put it in. So usually, they would connect the first church with the first seal. So then the pure but loveless church with the white horse, which traditionally was seen as the strong and growing faithful members, right? But you can already see how, you can reinterpret that. You can see it in two different ways. And I think especially once we've done the four churches, I think it might help to then see the four of them together. Because what you're going to see is the next three seals very much work together, very much have a similar instruction method, right? In terms of why it's being told to us. Any other comments before we give some time to prayer? I don't want to take too much time. Any questions about the first horse? I'll tell you this much. It's not going to be some spirit riding a ghost that's going to go through the cities and killing people. That's Hollywood, right? That's what the movies tell us. This is still very much symbolic, right? We have to remember that. These are all symbols here. The hard part is figuring out the symbolism, right? That's where the homework comes in, right? That's where studying comes in.
So when I first read the book of Revelation, I thought that every seal that was open is actually the content of the seal of the book, whatever it is. And sometimes we leave an impression that every seal that is broken, that is what the content is, but that is not what the content is. That is just an event once the seal is broken, and the content of the seal is something else. So
yeah, because as he's opening up the seals, we get to see more and more. That's really, what we're getting through those seven seals, right? But it's not the seals. It's not the seals themselves. That's a good point. Any other thoughts before we transition over? All right, let me stop recording here then, and we'll give some time to